So today I was going to talk about repair of aortic aneurysms and show you models of um, how these surgeries are performed, whether it's the open surgery or the endovascular surgery. Um, talk about the risk-benefit analysis for both of these, but um, as as things usually happen, I don't have those models with me today, or the material that we use for open repair. So I'm going to delay that till Wednesday so I can show you the models. It makes a lot more sense to see the pictures and the models of what we're using, the materials, and kind of to get a better idea of how we do stuff. So I'm going to talk about something else that I get asked about really frequently is how do you make decisions on surgical treatments or interventions for circulatory problems? Uh, so when I was younger, in my earlier years in practice, I was so gung-ho about, like, you see some data that comes out that shows benefit to a procedure, and you're like, okay, well, we need to just go ahead and get this done or do this procedure more frequently as long as they meet these criteria. But as I've gotten older in my practice and I've kind of done a lot of surgeries and thought through things, I've kind of changed my rationale for stuff. This whole business is about risk versus benefit analysis. So there's no doubt about it. So some things are riskier than others. Some procedures are riskier than others, and some procedures are not as risky as others. Vein ablation, treating varicose veins, ablation, lasering the vein shot, radiofrequency closing the vein is not as risky as, say, aortic aneurysm surgery. And so there's a different kind of I guess you'd say calculation in terms of why you do a procedure. Uh, that's not to say that varicose vein surgeries or ablation procedures don't have some potential complications to them, but there's a shift in the way you think about these things, not just in terms of the risks, but what's the long-term benefits. So over time, I think I've developed a way of thinking about things. I'm very conservative about surgical approaches anymore. And that's because things have changed in terms of management of circulation issues, and we know um, a lot more about how to manage them, and there's changes in terms of medication and stuff that I think need to be considered before you go through surgery. So the way I've kind of thought about it or put it into my mind is, so I use two filter systems from making decisions or recommending interventions. And so each case that I see and I consider surgical versus conservative management, I put them through these two filters. They're just broadly separated into the Ecolate filter, ECOLATE, and the convex concave kind of filter that I actually got from Nassim Taleb's book. I think it was the Black Swan. I can't remember, but so I usually think when I consider surgical approach or conservative management, I try and put those two filters in. So let's take those individually. I think Taleb's filter really applies to situations like, for example, carotid artery surgery. Now, years ago, there was a study that came out, the ACAS study, which suggested, 60% of men who have 60% stenosis benefit from carotid endarterectomy, even if they're not symptomatic. That's cleaning out the carotid artery because it's got blockage. And the rationale was reduce your risk for strokes. And so back then, that was kind of like, it came out in the New England Journal of Medicine, which is a great medical journal. And so it was kind of a rush to do carotid surgery. But then when you look back at it, you say, okay, how many carotid surgeries do you have to do before you make a difference in terms of stroke risk prevention? So that's a consideration. And the other consideration is there's so many changes in terms of medication now with Plavix, clopidogrel being available, uh, clopidogrel is the generic name, or statin drugs. Whether you're for or against statin drugs, irrelevant. That's we can discuss that someday. Maybe not irrelevant. But we can discuss that. But combination of statin drugs and clopidogrel reduces the risk for having strokes. And so, is it still worthwhile doing surgical approaches for patients who have carotid artery stenosis who are asymptomatic? And so, there's a real discussion about that. And even if it's a severe carotid stenosis, is there a benefit to carotid nephrectomy? And there's both sides of that argument. I think you need to talk to your surgeon and your whoever's involved in your care for your carotid artery disease. But for my rationale, my thinking is, look, here's a procedure that, generally speaking, is quite safe. There's different ways of doing it: carotid nephrectomy, carotid stenting, so-called TCAR, which we'll discuss at a later date. But there is a potential downside to the surgery. So the risk of surgery is about 2% of having a stroke or a heart problem from the surgery itself. And so, should we be doing something that has a 2% risk? What's the long-term risk for not operating on somebody? And those are those things you have to balance to. And so Nicholas Taleb's insight that rung a bell with me was, is this a concave lens or a convex lens? If you go through anything, is the benefits, especially in a high risk, or not a high risk, but a surgery that has, really significant potential downside. Having a stroke, when you come in and you're not symptomatic and you have a surgery and you have a stroke, that's a big deal. I mean, for me, the first time that happened, I couldn't sleep for 3 months. I mean, it was just horrifying. So if you have any kind of humanity left in us in surgery, we're still horrified when bad things happen. At least I am. I just wears me out when something bad happens. So is there a huge benefit to surgery in a procedure that carries a certain amount of risk, even if it be low? So carotid surgery is one of those situations I think about. I mean, how much benefit are we going to get by an intervention if the surgical risks, even if they're slow, can be quite devastating. Now, if they're symptomatic carotid stenosis, they had TIAs or mini strokes, fair enough. The risk for full-blown stroke becomes a lot higher. So that's one of the filters I use, is that lens convex or concave? Is it going to be, if you pass through that event, are you going to get a huge benefit in consideration of the small risk? And how many carotid surgeries do you have to do and somebody has no symptoms that you'll save one person or have one stroke? So that's the consideration. That's the Nicholas Taleb's convex concave lens model to look through to make decisions with. So that's one. And the Ecolate thing is more, I think, new to me, but I think it makes a lot of sense. And I think that's where a lot of people make mistakes, not just in medicine, but in life. And so my biggest mistakes have been when I haven't gone through that filter system. So what is that filter system? So there's 3 components to that. What are the words? Explanation of the procedure. What are the words? What are the numbers? What's the potential risk-benefit analysis? So that kind of is logical, and that's where most people go through those steps, thinking about what's the words, what's the risk-benefit analysis, what are the numbers, words, numbers. But where we screw up most on, I think, me personally in my own life, is and then what? The third component, and then what? What happens after the initial episode? Is this benefit to this procedure going to continue 5, 10, 15 years down the line, so that the risk-benefit analysis really starts to favor surgical procedures? And are you going to have recurrent problems? This is why I tell varicose vein patients, look, we can do your surgery. We can get rid of all these varicose veins that are painful for you, ugly, whatever, we can get rid of it. But I can guarantee you're going to get some more varicose veins somewhere down the line. They may not be as severe as you have right now, But 5, 10 years down the line, you're going to get some more varicose veins. And by my estimation, about 5% of people come back for more vein surgery or vein procedures. And the more you do, the more you're going to come back. So the third component, I think, of the filter is, and then what? Yeah, you get through the procedure, you do fine, but what's going to happen 2, 3, 5, 10 years down the line? And that's where you kind of we tend to not think that way. We tend to think about the short term, but never what happens in the long run. And I think that's a really important way of thinking about any kind of procedure, not just procedures we go through in medicine or we recommend, but also in life. What's the long-term implications of a decision that you make based on words and numbers? And I'll leave it at that. Again, if you find this stuff interesting, subscribe, ask me questions, I'm glad to answer. I'm going to get those models and material, and I will do the aortic aneurysm repair, talking about open aortic aneurysm repair, what to expect, and also endovascular aneurysm repair. I'll pick up those models tomorrow, and I'll probably do the video in the middle of this week, and then upload it, and then feel free to ask me questions.